Oh, and there is a lie that works for everyone. A lie that opens up your heart so I can get me some more of your free will. I'm winding you. Give me the control, that's why I'm telling you, selling you anything, everything, appealing to your human way of being. And I use it all against you just to keep your eyes from seeing past the life you're living, past the moment you're in, past the pleasure of your sin, or the cigarette you're smoking, choking on your lust. I'll make you drunk with pride, so deeply spun into my system that you won't see the light. Never mind that I'm drowning you, I keep deceiving you, 'cause I don't tell you about the God in heaven who loves you, who yearns for you. No, no, I don't tell you about the freedom of forgiveness and truth. Why would I tell you?
Good morning again. Welcome to week 4 and the final week of the series we're doing called Fig Leaf Conspiracy. I've been having some trouble with my van this last week. It's a 2001 Dodge Caravan Sport, okay? Got to put Sport on the end because it used to be our family vehicle and now it's just my vehicle, so I feel much better driving around town in the Sport version of the minivan than the other versions, I guess. But I've been having this trouble where it's really difficult to steer, and when I try to steer, it makes this horrible grinding noise. And it's got 214,000 miles on it. I feel like I'm in the bonus now, so I feel like, you know what? Maybe this is it. So this is the way it ends. You know, it's been a good run, but that's okay. You know, maybe it's time to move on from old Betsy here and get something different. So I'm explaining this to my wife, Heidi, and I'm telling her, describing what's going on, telling her, you know, I think I need to plan to get a new car here. And she said, so did you check the power steering fluid? And I'm like, the what? She's like, did you check the power steering fluid? I'm like, yeah, of course I checked the power steering fluid. You think I'm an idiot? Yeah, I checked the power steering fluid. Get out the manual. Power steering fluid, page 277. There it is, all the way in the back. So it turns out that there's this stuff called power steering fluid that helps with the turning of the steering wheel. Who would have thunk this? And there's a diagram that shows you where to find the place that you put the power steering fluid. So I'm reading about this, and it says that if it's low, you should add some more fluid. So I checked the reservoir, and I had to check the little picture 3 times to really figure out where it was. But then I checked it, and I scraped all the gunk off of it so I could look inside, and there wasn't even enough fluid in there for it to register at all. So I went to the store, and for $2.77, I bought some power steering fluid, and I put it in there per the instructions, and my van was miraculously healed. Hallelujah. I was about to junk the thing, and for $2.77, I was able to fix it. And here's what I learned through all that. Number 1, I should always talk to my wife first. That's number 1. Number 2, I should always consult the manual. For some reason, I never think about it. This thing just sits in the glove box for all of these years, and I rarely ever get it out. But doesn't it make sense that the manufacturer of my vehicle would know best how to maintain my vehicle? Doesn't it make sense that the manufacturer made the vehicle and produced this manual so that I could get the most use and the best enjoyment out of my vehicle? Doesn't it make sense that I might actually consult it once in a while and go, oh, that's what you're supposed to do. You mean you're supposed to change the oil? Wow. See, I would never look at this manual, though, and go, power steering fluid. What do they know about my van? Come on. They just don't want me to have fun. They don't want me to enjoy my sport version of the caravan. I would never do that. But yet God's given us an owner's manual. And it's called the Bible. And many of us would do the same thing with the Bible. God created you and me and everybody, and he created this thing that we call sex. And why would I ever think for a moment that God doesn't have something good to teach us about sex in his owner's manual? Doesn't it make sense that the one who created you, created me, and created sex might know a thing or two about it? I would never look in this and go, well, that's outdated. That's old-fashioned. God, what do you know about me anyway? What do you know about this gift that you created and you've given me? That would be absurd, but that's what so many of us do. We don't consult God's owner's manual for us and about sex. And the truth of the matter is that the best sex expert isn't Cosmopolitan. It's not Dr. Drew. It's not Karma Sutra. It's the Bible. God created you and he created sex, and the one who knows best how to use it is the one who made it. So today we are going to wrap up this series by looking in the owner's manual to discover 5 characteristics of shameless sexuality. And I know we've been talking a lot about shame and how Satan uses shame to distort and twist this gift that God's given us and how he uses that to damage and deceive us. And so we're going to learn today about how we can enjoy great sex God's way by following what he says in his word. So we're going to get right into it, talking about 5 characteristics of shameless sex that are found in God's owner's manual. Number 1, and there's an outline in your program if you want to take notes. Number 1, shameless sex is productive. Shameless sex is productive. Right in the beginning, the first chapter of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, it says, God blessed them, Adam and Eve, and he said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it. Now, I know that there are some people who are really kind of old and traditional and think that that's the only thing that sex is used for, is to produce children, and then you should just hurry up and get it over with and then stop and not do it anymore once you've had the kids. And then there are other people who think that it's like their personal mission to fill the earth with all their kids. Not talking about either one of those things. God created sex to be productive. And that doesn't mean that if you're not producing, if you're not able to have kids, or you're done having kids, or you're using birth control, that you're not using sex the way God intended. What it does mean is that if you are having sex outside of the marriage relationship with no intent of producing children, then you are outside of God's plan and God's design for sex. Think about it. God took and he gave us the most pleasurable gift there is, sex. And he said, use this to produce the most precious gift, life. That the most pleasurable and the most precious thing are intertwined, that God would give us this gift to produce life. It's amazing. Secondly, shameless sex is passionate. It is passionate. Now, if you read the Bible, you will find out that this is a passionate God, a God that is passionate for his people. And doesn't it make sense that this God who is passionate about us would put some of his passion in us, and that some of that passion would be reflected in our relationships with each other, and especially the relationship between a husband and wife? And God, in fact, thinks that passion between a husband and wife is so important that he devoted an entire book in the Bible just to talk about it. There's a book in the Bible called Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs, written by the wisest man who ever lived, Solomon. And this book, it's 8 chapters long, and scholars have long debated, why is this book in the Bible? It has nothing to do with God. It's just this love poem between a young man and a young woman, a young husband and a young wife. And the reason why it's in there is because God is a God of passion. And shameless sex is passionate. I want to just read an excerpt for you today, Could read basically anything, any of the 8 chapters, but I'll read this part. Might want to hang on to your hat here. Song of Solomon. The whole book is an interchange between a man and a woman. So it starts out with the young man saying, "You are beautiful, my darling, beautiful beyond words. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil. Your hair falls in waves like a flock of goats winding down the slopes of Gilead. Your teeth are as white as sheep, baby. Recently shorn and freshly washed." You may have to contextualize this if you want to use this on your woman, okay? But then it goes on to say, your breasts are like two your what? Can you say that in the Bible? Twin fawns of a gazelle grazing among the lilies. You have captured my heart, my treasure, my bride. You hold it hostage with one glance of your eyes, with a single jewel of your necklace. Your love delights me, my treasure, my bride. Your love is better than wine, your perfume more fragrant than spices. Your lips are as sweet as nectar, my bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue. Your clothes are scented like the cedars of Lebanon. You ever blush while reading the Bible? This might be about the only time. You are my private garden, my treasure, my bride, a secluded spring, a hidden fountain. Your thighs shelter a paradise of pomegranates. Woo! Holy smokes. This is in the Bible. And the woman responds, "Awake, north wind, rise up, south wind, and blow on my garden. Spread its fragrance all around. Come into your garden, my love, and taste its finest fruits." Wow. Have you ever heard passion like that? And that's in the Bible. That is God's design for a man and a woman to share that kind of passion together in a marriage relationship. Number 3, shameless sex is practical. It's practical. Proverbs 24, 3-4 says that a house is built by wisdom. It becomes strong through good sense. Through knowledge, its rooms are filled with all sorts of precious riches and valuables. Here's what I mean about sex being practical. Everything in our culture makes us want to think that sex outside of marriage is exciting and wonderful and great and awesome, and that sex inside of marriage is boring and mundane and routine. And both of those things are lies from the enemy. Sex outside of marriage isn't nearly as wonderful as Satan wants you to think. And sex inside of marriage isn't nearly as boring as Satan wants you to think. But what we're sold in society is that it's like we're supposed to be celebrities and rock stars that disengage from ordinary life in order to have these wild sexual fantasies. But sex isn't like that. Sex in the real world isn't like that. Sex in the real world is practical. Sex isn't disengaging from the ordinary life. It is indulging in the ordinary life. God created sex to be practical between a man and a woman, that through the everyday routine of the busyness, of the messiness, of the craziness of life, you are able to come together and say, you are fully mine and I am fully yours. And to do that, says it takes wisdom. It takes good sense. And it takes knowledge. Knowledge of God, knowledge of yourself, and knowledge of your spouse to make sex practical. Number 4, shameless sex is pleasurable. God didn't create sex just to reproduce. He actually created it for our good pleasure. Solomon in Proverbs 5 says, "Let your wife be a fountain of blessing for you. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. She is a loving deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts satisfy you always." I just realized that Solomon's the only one that says breasts in the Bible. Probably nothing significant about that. But may you always be captivated by her love. Why be captivated, my son, by an immoral woman or fondle the breast of a promiscuous woman? Shameless sex is pleasurable. But here's what Solomon is saying, is that God created sex not just to be physically pleasurable, but he created it to be emotionally pleasurable and spiritually pleasurable. And I talked about this for a few weeks ago, that when you have sex with somebody who's not your spouse, you're making that physical connection. But that the real enjoyment, the real pleasure comes when you have that emotional and that deeply spiritual connection. That's when you experience the true pleasure as God designed it. And you take pleasure in knowing that that person is committed wholly and fully to you, and you are committed wholly and fully to them. Number 5, shameless sex is pure. It is pure. There's 2 things I want to talk about here. The first thing is that pure sex is sanctifying. I know that's a big word. To sanctify means to make holy, to set apart, to consecrate. And you've probably never thought of sex this way. But listen what the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians chapter 5. It says, husbands ought to love their wives as they love their own bodies. For a man who loves his wife actually shows love for himself. No one hates his own body, but he feeds and cares for it, just as Christ cares for the church, and we are members of his body. As the scriptures say, a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. This is a great mystery, but as an illustration of the way Christ and the church are one. So again I say, each man must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Whoever would have thought, I wish somebody told me this before, that sex between a man and a woman is actually an illustration of Christ's love for the church. That's how significant it is. That God designed sex between one man and one woman to be this place where they could reflect how Christ serves the church and loves the church. That in that way, it's supposed to be pure and shameless and sanctifying, set apart for God and set apart solely for each other. Shameless sex is not consumed with what it wants for itself. It is rather concerned with what God wants and what its partner wants. And great sex does not come from mastering some sort of great technique, like you got to become an expert at the latest technique. You see those articles all the time in the magazines and online. Rather, great sex comes when a husband and wife serve each other fully and sacrificially as Christ serves the church and put each other's needs ahead of their own. The second thing about shameless sex being pure is that it is also sticky. Sex is sticky. Back to the creation account in Genesis chapter 2. Verse 22 says, Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib, and he brought her to the man. At last the man exclaimed, This one is bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh. She will be called woman because she was taken from man. This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Now the man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. Here's something else that I wish somebody would have told me when I was a teenager or a young adult. It's not saying I do that unifies you. It's sex. Sex is what unifies you. Sex is what makes you one flesh. Not that you shouldn't say, I do, by any means. But it's not that act of standing before a priest or a pastor or a judge that unifies you. It is the sex act that unifies you, because God created sex to be the covenant sign and seal of marriage. And when that happens, the two become one. They are unified. One flesh, this says. And that way, sex has been described to be like duct tape by some people. That it's sticky, like duct tape. When you've got a man and a woman. I'm going to do it this way this time. Oh, I'm screwing it up. It's so sticky. Anyway, so you've got a man and a woman. And they're meant to have sex together forever. One man and one woman. And this is how it's supposed to work. You try to pull them apart. Anybody want to try? You can. Well, if you nominate somebody, that means that you have to do it, Nathan. That's what I learned in school. All right. I can't even get the things apart. They're stuck together so good. So what happens then? If you have sex with somebody that's not your spouse, you have sex with multiple people. What happens then is you take the stickiness and you stick it. Josiah, come here. You do the honors. You got to pull it from. I'm told it's more painful if you pull it from the bottom.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Pretty good. Now your chest?
Yeah. Oh, now we got to. So what happens then is you lose some of the stickiness and you take some of that person with you. And then you go to the next person. Here, you want to put it on there?
I guess.
Wherever you want.
I wanted the chest.
I think that would be minorly inappropriate. You have soft hands. Here.
Thank you. This is a little...
All right, so now you've got that first person with you and the second person with you, and it comes off a little bit easier, doesn't it?
Yep.
All right, let's do it a third time here. All right, I think that's enough. I think we proved the point. Thank you, Josiah. So what happens every time you have sex with somebody, you take a little bit of them with you, and it becomes less sticky. So what happens then when you've had sex with all these people, and then you find that special person that you want to spend the rest of your life with, and you find that person, and you try to stick to them, and it doesn't stick nearly as well. Because all the stickiness is gone. God created sex to be a unifying act between one man and one woman. And that's why it hurts so bad when you rip them apart. Listen to what the Apostle Paul says, 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Don't you realize that if a man joins himself to a prostitute, he becomes one body with her? For the scriptures say the two are united into one. But the person who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him. Run from sexual sin. No other sin so clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. It is not just a physical union. It is a spiritual union that happens. Some people have described it as a soul tie, that your souls actually become tied together when you have sex with somebody. Before we wrap this up, I want to just give you 5 ways that you can have great sex God's way. Some very practical ways to have great sex God's way. Number 1, commit to your partner. This means committing to your spouse even if you're not married. That means if you're having sex with somebody that you have no intention of marrying, you think this isn't going to work out, there's no way I'm spending the rest of my life with this person, then you need to stop having sex with that person right now. If you're in a relationship, you're having sex with somebody and you're thinking, well, maybe it'll work out, I'm just kind of testing it out to see. You need to stop having sex with that person so that you can figure it out, because you need to commit to your future spouse. If you're having sex with somebody and maybe you're engaged and you think, oh yeah, we're going to spend the rest of our life together, you need to stop until you stand before a pastor or a judge and before God and before your friends and your family, and you say publicly that we are committed solely and wholly to each other for the rest of our lives. You need to make a commitment. So if you're in a relationship where you're having sex with somebody, you have two options. Stop having sex and get out of that relationship, or get married. Get married if it's the right person. Either way, you need to make a commitment. Secondly, communicate. Communicate with each other. I can't tell you how much pain would be avoided and how much pleasure could be had if husbands and wives would just communicate with each other. It's a foundational part of marriage, but so few people, especially those who come from religious backgrounds, will actually communicate with each other about sex. And it's one of the things that we talk about in premarital counseling, because so few people grow up actually with it being okay to talk about it. But you need to be able to communicate with each other, to communicate about your needs and your wants and your likes and your dislikes, your expectations and your desires. This requires you to be honest and vulnerable. But if you're with somebody who you're going to be with for the rest of your life, you need to learn to be honest and vulnerable. Third thing then is to plan it out. This is what I know, what single people think makes sex inside of marriage so boring and so mundane is, oh, you guys have to actually plan to have sex, and all that stuff. Here's the thing. We all plan out our lives, every bit of it. We plan our vacations, we plan our work, we plan when we're going to go here and when we're going to go there, we plan our finances, we plan everything. Why would you fail to plan the most important part of your marriage? Why would you just leave that to happenstance? So, well, maybe if we've got time, that might possibly could happen. No. Why would you give your spouse your leftovers, your absolute last, when you're giving everything to everybody else and you're completely worn out and stressed out? Give your spouse your best. Plan for it. Plan a time and a place, a when, a where, a how, when it's going to happen, and anticipate it. Fourth, play together. Quite simply, couples who enjoy each other outside of the bedroom enjoy each other inside of the bedroom that much more. When you see couples who are all affectionate with each other and they smile at each other, and you can just see how much they enjoy each other's company, it's not because they're having great sex in the bedroom that they're enjoying each other outside of the bedroom. It's because they're enjoying each other outside of the bedroom that they're having great sex inside of the bedroom. Couples that play together stay together. And then number 5 is to pray together. Doesn't it make sense that if sex is part of God's purpose and plan for your life, and that if Satan's plan is to distort and twist and deceive us so that that plan will lead to damage and destruction in our lives, and that if sex is not just something that is physical, but is a deeply spiritual connection where the two become one, then doesn't it make sense that sex is actually a spiritual battle and we need to engage it in a spiritual realm through prayer? Couples who are connected together spiritually through prayer will be more connected together sexually. Couples who are on the same page, going in the same direction spiritually, will be on the same page in the same direction sexually as well. Well, I know we started this series 4 weeks ago, and for many of you it seems like an eternity that we've been going through this. It's been one difficult series after another difficult series that we did before that. And I know for many of you, your hearts are heavy. You know, the first week we did this series, we asked you to lay your fig leaves down as a sign of letting go of your shame. And we had you come up and put them on the communion table. And I've got a stack of them here, and I'm not going to read them. But why I brought them here is to say, this might not look like much, but there's a lot of heaviness in here. There's a lot of weight. I can feel the weight. The weight of the wounds, the weight of the pain, and the hurts that you've been carrying around. And maybe you've been going through the series and you just feel like you're completely overwhelmed. Like, man, I've just screwed up so bad. I've just screwed up so bad. I've made so many mistakes. I'm damaged goods. Nobody could love me. God couldn't love me. I can't do anything right. I can't get it right. And maybe some of you, you're still making those mistakes. You're just struggling through it. You're still struggling to try and live this and do this God's way. And here's the one thing I want you to remember. If you forget everything else in this entire series, here's the one thing you need to remember. God redeems your bad choice with his good plan. God redeems your bad choice with his good plan. We talked about this the first week briefly, but look at what happens. After Adam and Eve sin and they are overcome by their shame, after God gives Adam and Eve their consequences, then he turns to the serpent and he says, I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. Her offspring will strike your head, and your offspring will strike his heel. What's it talking about there? It's talking about the coming Messiah. That God already had a plan in place from the very beginning. That before there was even a problem, God had a solution. And the solution was Jesus Christ. That he would come out of this whole horrible mess that happened with Adam and Eve in sin. That God would bring something beautiful out of that mess. And you need to know that no matter what problem you're facing, no matter what issue you're struggling with, God has a plan to redeem it. God has a plan to redeem your bad situation, your bad choice with his good plan. This happens on a very broad scale through Jesus Christ. But it also happens on a very specific scale for each one of you. Listen again to what happens here in this. It says to Eve, or it says about Adam and Eve, then the man Adam in Genesis 3:20 named his wife Eve because she would be the mother of all who live. So out of this sin that brought about death and destruction, God would still use Eve to bring life. God would still use Eve to bring life. And God has a plan for each one of you. To take your horrible choices, your mistakes, the things that have been done to you, the damage that's happened, and to turn that and use that for good. In fact, the Apostle Paul says it this way in Galatians chapter 4. But when the right time came, God sent his son, born of a woman, subject to the law. He goes through to say that, to connect this then to Eve, to the first mother. And it says, God sent him, Jesus, to buy freedom for us who are slaves to the law so that he could adopt us as his very own children. That is your identity. We talked about how Satan wants to use our sexuality to identify us. But according to God, God doesn't identify you as straight or gay or single or married or a virgin or a whore. You are a child of God. You are a prince of the king or a princess of the king. That is your identity. That is your identity according to God. So maybe you've made some choices. Maybe your marriage is all messed up because of things that you've done. You need to know that God can and will make something beautiful out of your marriage. Maybe you've totally screwed up, used God's gift of sexuality outside of his plan. And you've totally messed it up. And you feel like you're just damaged goods. You need to know that God can and he will take the mess that you've made and make something beautiful out of it. And I know some of you today, maybe you feel like your lives you're just spinning completely out of control. You headed down a road and you thought it was good. It seemed right, it seemed fun, but now you can see that it's ending in destruction. And there are a trail of bodies in its wake. You need to know that God can and will redeem your bad choices with his good and perfect plan. It's time for you to bring your fig leaf and to lay it down and to say to God, I am done running. I am done hiding. I am done trying to do things my way. God, I want to come clean, and I need you to make me clean. I need you to forgive me and to change me and to take the things that I've done and use that for your good. I want to invite you to pray with me this morning. And the band's going to come up and we're going to sing one last song. But what I want to do is I want to invite me, if you are ready to say to God, today is a new day. Today is the day where I'm laying down all of my crap, all of my junk, and I'm taking up what you have for me. I want to invite you to stand with me as I pray. So you can go ahead and do that if you want as I pray. Dear God, we come before you with all that we are. God, all the mess that we've made, the damage that's been done. God, and we just want to confess that before you. God, and say, would you take us? Would you cleanse us? Would you make us whole and make us new again? God, where there are wounds, would you heal us? God, where there are holes in our hearts, would you bring wholeness? God, where there's this ugly heap of mess that we've created, would you bring beauty from these ashes? Would you bring life from this death that we've created? God, and may you give us the power through your Holy Spirit and through Jesus Christ to live the way that you created us to live. For your glory we pray.